The pristine neighborhood of Oakwood Heights was known for its tree-lined streets and perfectly manicured lawns. People moved here for the safety, the good schools, and the sense of community. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, where children could play outside until dusk, and where serious crime was something that happened elsewhere. In the big city, perhaps, but not here, not in Oakwood Heights. That changed on a cool October morning when Detective Sarah Morgan received a call that would lead her into one of the most peculiar cases of her 15-year career. Detective Morgan. Her voice was calm as she answered, balancing her phone between her ear and shoulder while pouring her first cup of coffee for the day. "We need you at 47 Maple Drive," said the dispatcher. "Possible homicide." Sarah set down her coffee mug, the liquid inside still untouched. "Oakwood Heights?" "Yes, ma'am." "Officers on scene requested you specifically." 20 minutes later, Sarah pulled up to a 2-story colonial home with dark green shutters. Police tape had already been strung across the front yard, and a small crowd of neighbors had gathered at the perimeter, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Detective James Chen, Sarah's partner of 3 years, met her at the edge of the property. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened and hair slightly out of place. "What do we have?" Sarah asked, ducking under the yellow tape. "Victim is Eleanor Wells, 42, found in her bedroom by her sister who came to check on her after she missed their usual Sunday brunch. Time of death? Me puts it between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. last night." Sarah nodded, slipping on a pair of latex gloves as they approached the front door. "Any signs of forced entry?" "None," James replied. "Alarm system was not activated and all doors and windows are intact. Whoever did this either had a key or was let in." The interior of the house was pristine, almost unnaturally so. Gleaming hardwood floors, carefully arranged furniture, and not a speck of dust in sight. Family photos lined the walls, showing Eleanor with a man Sarah presumed to be her husband and a teenage daughter. "Where's the family?" Sarah asked. "Husband, Richard Wells, is on a business trip in Chicago, confirmed by his hotel and multiple witnesses. Daughter, Zoe, 17, is staying at a friend's house for the weekend. We've contacted both, and they're on their way back." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, the plush carpet muffling their footsteps. At the end of the hallway was the master bedroom, the door already open with crime scene technicians moving methodically around the space. The body of Eleanor Wells lay on the king-sized bed, her eyes closed as if in sleep. If not for the unnatural stillness and the slight discoloration of her skin, she might have been merely resting. There were no visible wounds, no pool of blood, nothing to immediately suggest violence. "Cause of death?" Sarah asked, addressing the medical examiner who was making notes beside the body. "Asphyxiation," Dr. Patel replied without looking up. "No external trauma besides some light bruising on the face consistent with being smothered. I'll know more after the autopsy, but preliminary examination suggests she was suffocated, likely with a pillow." Sarah surveyed the bed. Several decorative pillows were arranged at the headboard, and 2 standard sleeping pillows lay beside the body. "Which pillow?" Dr. Patel pointed to an evidence bag being carried out by a technician. "That one. There are traces of makeup and skin cells on the fabric that don't match the victim's. We're rushing the analysis." Sarah turned her attention back to the room. Nothing seemed out of place, no signs of struggle. The bedside table held a glass of water, a novel with a bookmark about halfway through, and a pair of reading glasses. The victim's phone was plugged into a charger. Was she taken by surprise? Sarah mused aloud. Asleep, perhaps? "Toxicology will tell us if she was sedated," Dr. Patel said, "but there's no evidence of food or drink tampering in the house so far." "What about the rest of the house?" Sarah asked, turning to James. "Untouched. Nothing missing according to the sister. No jewelry, electronics, or cash taken. This doesn't look like a robbery gone wrong." Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the backyard below. A large golden retriever was lying on the patio, watched over by a uniformed officer. "The family dog?" "Yes, Bailey," James replied. 5 years old, according to the tags. Very well behaved. Hasn't made a sound since we arrived." Sarah frowned. Strange that a dog wouldn't bark during a home invasion or when its owner was being attacked. Maybe it knew the killer, James suggested, or it was somehow kept from interfering. After completing their preliminary examination of the crime scene, Sarah and James made their way downstairs to speak with the victim's sister, Catherine Walsh, who was sitting in the living room, her face pale and hands trembling slightly. as she clutched a cup of untouched tea. "Ms. Walsh," Sarah began gently, taking a seat across from her. "I know this is difficult, but we need to ask you some questions about your sister." Catherine nodded, her red-rimmed eyes meeting Sarah's. "I understand. I want to help find whoever did this to Ellie. Can you tell us about yesterday? When was the last time you spoke with your sister?" "We talked on the phone around 6 p.m., Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We confirmed our brunch plans for today. She seemed fine. Normal. She mentioned Richard was away on business, and Zoe was staying at her friend Madison's house for the weekend." "So she was alone in the house?" James asked. "Just her and Bailey, the dog," Catherine confirmed. "But that wasn't unusual. Richard travels frequently for work." "Was Eleanor anxious about staying alone?" Sarah asked. "Did she ever express any concerns about her safety?" Catherine shook her head firmly. "Never. Ellie loved this neighborhood. She always said it was the safest place she'd ever lived. She didn't even lock the back door half the time, despite Richard telling her she should." Sarah made a note of this. "Did your sister have any enemies? Anyone who might want to harm her?" "Ellie?" Catherine let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "No. Everyone loved her. She volunteered at the animal shelter. She organized the neighborhood watch. She coached Zoe's soccer team until last year. She was the best person I knew." "What about her marriage?" James asked carefully. "Were there any problems between her and Richard?" Catherine hesitated, just long enough for Sarah to notice. "They had their ups and downs like any couple. Richard works a lot. Ellie sometimes felt neglected, but they were working through it." She mentioned they were going to counseling. "And how about Zoe? How was Eleanor's relationship with her daughter?" "They were close," Catherine said, but again there was a slight hesitation. "Teenagers, you know. There were arguments sometimes, especially lately. Zoe wants to go to art school after graduation, but Ellie and Richard had their hearts set on her attending Richard's alma mater, Dartmouth." Before Sarah could ask another question, the front door opened, and a teenage girl rushed in, followed by a tall man in a rumpled business suit. "Where's my mom?" the girl demanded, her voice breaking. "What happened to my mom?" Sarah stood, recognizing them from the family photos as Zoe and Richard Wells. The man's face was ashen, his eyes wide with shock. "I'm Detective Morgan, and this is Detective Chen," Sarah said gently. "Mr. Wells, Zoe, I'm very sorry for your loss." "I need to see her," Richard said, his voice hollow. "I'm afraid that's not possible right now, sir," James explained. "The medical examiner is still processing the scene." Zoe collapsed onto the sofa next to her aunt, who wrapped her arms around the girl's shaking shoulders. Richard remained standing, looking lost in his own home. "What happened?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That's what we're trying to determine," Sarah replied. "We need to ask you both some questions. I know this is an incredibly difficult time, but the sooner we can gather information, the better our chances of finding who did this." Richard nodded mechanically, finally sinking into an armchair. "Anything. Ask anything. When did you last speak with your wife?" "Last night around 9 p.m., he said. "I called from my hotel to say goodnight. It was a quick conversation. I had an early meeting this morning." "And how did she seem?" "Normal, fine." Richard ran a hand through his hair. "She was just watching TV, said Bailey was keeping her company. Everything seemed fine." Sarah turned to Zoe, whose face was buried in her aunt's shoulder. "Zoe, when did you last talk to your mother?" The teenager lifted her head, her makeup streaked with tears. "Yesterday afternoon before I left for Madison's. Around 4, I guess." "And how was that conversation?" Zoe's eyes flashed with something. Guilt? Anger? It was gone before Sarah could identify it. "It was fine." "Was there anyone who might want to hurt your mother?" Sarah asked, addressing both of them. Richard shook his head emphatically. "No, absolutely not. Eleanor was beloved by everyone who knew her." "What about the new neighbors?" Zoe said suddenly, causing all eyes to turn to her. "What new neighbors?" Sarah asked. "The Parkers," Zoe explained, wiping at her eyes. "They moved in next door about 3 months ago. Mom had some kind of disagreement with Mrs. Parker recently. Something about their fence encroaching on our property." Richard frowned. "That was nothing, Zoe. A minor property dispute that was resolved weeks ago." "Mom was still upset about it," Zoe insisted. "I heard her on the phone with her friend Linda saying that Diane Parker was a vindictive witch who needed to be put in her place." Sarah exchanged a glance with James. "We'll look into it," she assured them. "For now, is there somewhere you can stay? We'll need the house for a while longer." "They can stay with me," Catherine offered. "I have plenty of room." Richard nodded absently, then seemed to remember something. "What about Bailey, our dog?" "An officer is with him in the backyard," James explained. "We can arrange for him to go with you." At that moment, a crime scene technician appeared in the doorway, gesturing for Sarah to join him. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway. "We found something interesting," the technician said, keeping his voice low. "There are scratches all over the back door, both inside and outside, and dog hair everywhere around it. Looks like the dog was trying to get in or out desperately at some point." Sarah's brow furrowed. "The dog was inside when the sister found the body, correct?" "Yes, but here's the thing. There's mud on the dog's paws that matches the garden soil, and the garden shows signs of being disturbed. It's possible the dog was outside during the night and came back in at some point." Sarah returned to the living room with this new information. "Mr. Wells, was Bailey typically kept inside or outside overnight?" Richard looked confused by the question. "Inside, always. Eleanor was very protective of him. He sleeps in the laundry room off the kitchen." "Does Bailey ever try to get outside by himself? Scratch at the doors?" "No," Richard said firmly. "He's extremely well trained. We've never had an issue with that." Sarah nodded, making a mental note. "And one more question. Does Bailey bark at strangers or when someone approaches the house?" "Constantly," Zoe interjected. "He goes crazy whenever the delivery guy comes or if someone he doesn't know walks up the driveway. Mom said he was better than any security system." This was getting more peculiar by the minute. A protective dog that apparently didn't bark when an intruder entered the home and killed its owner, and evidence suggesting the dog had been outside during the night, despite the family's insistence that Bailey always slept indoors. "Thank you for your cooperation," Sarah said. "We'll be in touch soon. For now, please try to get some rest, and don't hesitate to call if you think of anything else that might be relevant." After the family had left with Catherine, Sarah and James reconvened in the kitchen. "What are you thinking?" James asked, leaning against the counter. "I'm thinking we need to know more about that dog," Sarah replied. "And I want to speak with the Parkers next door." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Patel, who entered with a tablet in hand. "Preliminary findings," she said, handing the tablet to Sarah. "Cause of death confirmed as asphyxiation, most likely by pillow. Time of death refined to between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. And here's something interesting. We found dog hair embedded in the victim's nightgown and on her skin, concentrated around her face and neck." Sarah looked up from the tablet. "So the dog was in close contact with her around the time of death?" "That's what the evidence suggests," Dr. Patel confirmed. "And there's more. We found traces of a sedative in the glass of water by her bed. Not enough to knock her out completely, but enough to make her groggy and slow to react. That might explain why there are no defensive wounds," James mused. "And possibly why the dog didn't bark. The killer might have already been in the house, someone the dog knew." Sarah handed the tablet back to Dr. Patel. "Let's go talk to the neighbors." Diane and Robert Parker lived in a house nearly identical to the Wells home, though their property lacked the meticulous care that Eleanor had clearly put into her own yard. They appeared genuinely shocked when Sarah and James identified themselves and explained why they were there. "Eleanor's dead?" Diane Parker's hand flew to her mouth. That's horrible. What happened?" "We're investigating the circumstances," Sarah said carefully. "We understand there was some tension between you and Mrs. Wells recently over a property line dispute." Diane's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "It was a minor disagreement that was resolved. The survey showed the fence was correctly placed. Eleanor wasn't happy about it, but those were the facts." "How would you describe your relationship with the Wells family?" James asked. Robert Parker, a tall man with thinning hair, answered. "Cordial, professional. We're not close, but there was no real animosity. The property thing was unfortunate timing. We had just moved in and wanted to replace the old fence. We followed the survey markers." "Did either of you hear or see anything unusual last night?" Sarah asked. "Any noises, vehicles, people walking by?" The Parkers exchanged a look before Diane answered. "Actually, yes. Their dog was barking like crazy around midnight. It went on for at least 20 minutes. Robert was going to go over and complain, but then it suddenly stopped." "Did you see anyone enter or leave the Wells house?" "No," Robert said firmly, "but their backyard isn't fully visible from our windows." "One more question," Sarah said. "Do you know if the dog is usually kept inside or outside overnight?" "Inside," Diane replied without hesitation. "Eleanor was paranoid about coyotes getting into the yard. That dog is treated better than most children." As they walked back to their car, James said, "So the Parkers heard the dog barking at midnight, right in our time of death window. But then it suddenly stopped." and everyone agrees the dog is normally kept inside and barks at strangers. Yet there was evidence the dog had been outside, and dog hair was found on the victim's face and neck, Sarah added. Something doesn't add up. Their next stop was Madison Cooper's house, where Zoe had allegedly spent the night. Madison was a petite blonde girl who seemed genuinely distraught about Eleanor's death. Mrs. Wells was amazing, she said, sitting in her family's living room with her parents nearby. She always made the best cookies when we had sleepovers. What time did Zoe arrive here yesterday? Sarah asked. Around 4:30, Madison replied. We were going to go to the movies, but Zoe wasn't really in the mood, so we just stayed here and watched Netflix. And she stayed the entire night. Madison hesitated, looking at her parents nervously. Madison, her father said gently, this is a police investigation. You need to tell the truth. The girl bit her lip. Zoe left around 11:30. She said she forgot something important at home and needed to get it. She asked me to cover for her if her mom called, but Mrs. Wells never did. Zoe came back around 1 a.m. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Did she say what she forgot? No, just that it was important. When she came back, she seemed different, quiet. She went straight to bed and barely talked this morning until her dad called about her mom. Did you notice anything unusual about her appearance or behavior when she returned? Madison thought for a moment. Her hair was wet. She said it was raining, but it wasn't. And Bailey, their dog, usually leaves hair all over her clothes because she cuddles with him, but I didn't see any dog hair on her that night. After thanking Madison and her parents, Sarah and James sat in their car, processing this new information. Zoe lied about her whereabouts, James stated. She left her friend's house at 11:30 and returned at 1 a.m., exactly within our time of death window, and came back with wet hair on a night when it wasn't raining, Sarah added. What if she washed her hair to remove evidence? And Madison specifically mentioned the absence of dog hair on Zoe's clothes, which is apparently unusual. You think the daughter killed her own mother? James sounded skeptical. Over an argument about college? It's too early to make that assumption, Sarah cautioned. But we need to talk to Zoe again, and I want more information about that dog. Back at the station, Sarah reviewed the evidence they had collected so far. The case was becoming increasingly complex, with the dog somehow at the center of it all. She placed a call to the veterinarian listed on Bailey's tags. Dr. Reynolds. Bailey is an extremely well-behaved dog, Dr. Reynolds confirmed. Eleanor put him through extensive training. He responds to specific commands and doesn't bark without reason. Would he bark at someone entering the house at night? Sarah asked. Absolutely, unless it was someone he knew very well. And even then, entering at an unusual hour might trigger a response. One more question, Dr. Reynolds. Would Bailey attempt to interfere if he saw someone attacking Eleanor? There was a pause on the line. That's hard to say. He's not trained as a protection dog, but the bond between them was strong. My guess is he would at least bark aggressively, possibly even try to intervene. After hanging up, Sarah turned to James. The dog would have barked at an intruder and likely tried to protect Eleanor. Yet, according to the evidence, the dog was either outside during the attack or somehow prevented from interfering. And there's dog hair on the victim's face and neck, James added, as if the dog was in close contact with her around the time of death. Sarah's phone rang. It was the lab. Detective Morgan, we have preliminary results from the pillow found at the scene. We recovered partial fingerprints that don't match the victim or her husband. We're running them through the system now. What about the daughter? Have you compared them to Zoe Wells? We don't have her prints on file. We'd need to collect them for comparison. Sarah thanked the technician and hung up. We need to bring Zoe in for questioning. At Catherine Walsh's house, Richard opened the door, looking even more haggard than before. Have you found who did this to Eleanor? We're following several leads, Sarah said diplomatically. We need to speak with Zoe again. Is she here? Richard's expression darkened. Why? She's been through enough today. It's just routine follow-up, James assured him. Some clarification on her earlier statement. She's upstairs resting, Richard said reluctantly. I'll get her. While they waited, Sarah noticed Bailey lying in the corner of the living room, watching them with alert eyes. The dog showed no signs of agitation or unusual behavior. Zoe appeared a few minutes later, her eyes red and puffy. She sat on the couch, her father beside her, an arm protectively around her shoulders. Zoe, Sarah began gently, we spoke with Madison Cooper. She told us you left her house around 11:30 last night and returned at 1 a.m. The girl's face paled and her father's arm stiffened around her. Is this true? Richard demanded, looking at his daughter. Zoe's eyes filled with tears. Yes, but I can explain. We're listening, Sarah said, keeping her tone neutral. I went home to talk to Mom, Zoe admitted. We had a huge fight before I left for Madison's. About college, about everything. I felt terrible and wanted to apologize. Did you enter the house? James asked. I tried to. I used my key, but Bailey was going crazy, barking and scratching at the back door from inside. I couldn't get him to calm down, which was weird because he always listens to me. What happened then? Sarah prompted when Zoe fell silent. I couldn't get in with Bailey acting like that, and I didn't want to wake Mom if she was sleeping, so I gave up and went back to Madison's. Zoe, Sarah said carefully, Madison mentioned your hair was wet when you returned, but it wasn't raining last night. The teenager's hand unconsciously went to her hair. I took a shower at home, in the pool house. I was upset and thought it might calm me down. Richard was looking at his daughter with growing concern. Zoe, why didn't you tell me this earlier? Because I knew how it would look, she cried. Mom is dead, and I snuck out to our house in the middle of the night. I was scared. Sarah studied the girl closely. Her distress seemed genuine, but something still felt off. Zoe, we'll need to take your fingerprints for elimination purposes. It's standard procedure. Do we need a lawyer present for that? Richard asked, his protective instincts clearly triggered. That's your right, Sarah acknowledged. But it would help us clear Zoe and focus on other suspects if her prints don't match those found at the scene. Richard hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but I'm coming with her. At the station, Zoe's fingerprints were taken and rushed to the lab for comparison. While they waited, Sarah received a call from Dr. Patel. Detective, the autopsy revealed something interesting. The victim had several long, fine hairs clutched in her right hand. They appear to be synthetic, possibly from a wig. A wig? Sarah repeated, frowning. Are you sure they're not just from a blanket or clothing? Positive. These are designed to mimic human hair but are definitely synthetic. And there's more. We found microscopic blue fibers embedded in the dog hair on the victim's nightgown. They don't match anything we collected from the house. After hanging up, Sarah shared this information with James. So we have synthetic hair and blue fibers that don't belong in the house, and a dog that was apparently frantic, barking and scratching at the door, according to Zoe. But everyone else says Bailey is well trained and calm, James pointed out. And if the dog was inside barking like crazy as Zoe claims, how did the killer get in without being attacked by the dog? Unless, Sarah's eyes widened as a theory began to form. Unless the dog wasn't actually in the house during the murder. What if the dog hair on Eleanor's body and the pillow was planted there? Before James could respond, the lab technician appeared with a file. We have a match on the fingerprints from the pillow. They belong to Zoe Wells. Sarah wasn't entirely surprised. And the partial prints on the back door handle? Also a match to Zoe. With this confirmation, Sarah and James returned to the interview room where Zoe and Richard were waiting. Zoe Wells, Sarah began formally. Your fingerprints match those found on the pillow used to smother your mother. Richard jumped to his feet. That's impossible. Zoe would never... Dad, stop, Zoe interrupted, her voice suddenly calm. The transformation was startling. The tearful, frightened teenager was gone, replaced by someone with a cold, steady gaze. It's over. Zoe? Richard sank back into his chair, staring at his daughter in disbelief. I need to speak with the detectives alone, Zoe said, not looking at her father. No, absolutely not, Richard protested. We need a lawyer. I don't want a lawyer, Dad. Zoe's voice was firm. I want to explain what happened. After a heated exchange, Richard reluctantly agreed to step outside, though he insisted on calling an attorney immediately. Once he was gone, Zoe sat straight in her chair, composed in a way that seemed incongruous with the situation. I didn't mean to kill her, she began, her voice eerily detached. I just wanted to scare her, to show her she couldn't control my entire life. Tell us what happened, Sarah said, pressing the record button on the device between them. I left Madison's house at 11:30. I knew Mom would be alone. Dad was in Chicago, and I had let Bailey out into the yard earlier that day and made sure the gate was unlatched. He got out, just like I planned. So the dog wasn't in the house? James clarified. No, I checked before I went to Madison's. I could see Bailey wandering around the neighborhood. Mom didn't know yet. She thought he was in the laundry room. Why did you let the dog out? Sarah asked. Because Bailey would have tried to protect her. He always did. He was her dog, never mine. There was a flash of resentment in Zoe's eyes. I came back wearing a blue hoodie and a blonde wig I used in the school play last year. I didn't want Mom to recognize me immediately. I wanted to scare her, to make her think someone had broken in. But you had a key, James pointed out. Yes, I entered through the back door. Mom was in bed reading. She had taken her sleeping pill, she always does when Dad is away. I stood in the doorway, and when she looked up, I could see the fear in her eyes. Zoe's voice remained steady, but her hands had begun to tremble slightly. She screamed, "Who are you? Get out." And I lost it. All the anger about how she was trying to control my future, how she and Dad had my entire life planned out without even asking what I wanted. I grabbed a pillow and pressed it over her face just to shut her up, to make her listen to me for once. And then, Sarah prompted when Zoe fell silent. She struggled, harder than I expected. She grabbed at my wig, pulled some of the hair out. When she stopped moving, I panicked. I checked for a pulse, but I couldn't find one. I hadn't meant to press that hard or for that long. What did you do then? I ran to the pool house and showered, washed away any evidence. Then I remembered about Bailey. I needed him back in the house, or my story wouldn't make sense. So you brought the dog back? Zoe nodded. I found him a few houses down and brought him home. But when I tried to get him inside, he went crazy. He could smell that something was wrong, that something had happened to Mom. He kept barking and scratching at the door. I couldn't get him to stop or to come inside. But the dog was inside when the body was discovered, James noted. I came back early this morning before Aunt Catherine arrived. I brought treats, managed to coax Bailey inside. Then I messed up his paws in the garden soil to make it look like he'd been digging. I took some of his hair and placed it on Mom's body and on the pillow. You tried to make it look like the dog was responsible somehow? Sarah asked, incredulous. Not exactly, Zoe said, shaking her head. I was going to say an intruder broke in, and Bailey tried to protect Mom but couldn't. That would explain the dog hair on her. I didn't realize I'd left my fingerprints on the pillow. I was wearing gloves, but they must have come off during the struggle. Sarah studied the girl across from her, trying to reconcile this calculating individual with the distraught teenager they'd interviewed earlier. Why Zoe? Was it really just about college? Something flickered in Zoe's eyes. A deeper pain, perhaps. It was about everything. Mom never saw me as my own person. I was just an extension of her, a second chance to live the life she thought she had missed out on. Dartmouth, then law school, then a prestigious firm. The path she gave up to marry Dad and have me. She never asked what I wanted. And what do you want? James asked quietly. I want to create art, to study in Paris, to make something beautiful. Zoe's voice broke for the first time, and now I'll never get to do any of it. The door opened, and a woman in a sharp suit entered. I'm Andrea Lowell, Zoe's attorney. This interview is over. As Zoe was led away, Sarah turned to James. She staged the entire scene, removed the dog so it wouldn't interfere, killed her mother, then tried to use the dog to create confusion about what happened. But she made one critical mistake, James said. She left her fingerprints on the pillow. Sarah finished. In the following days, the case against Zoe Wells was built methodically. The synthetic hairs found in Eleanor's hand matched the school play wig discovered hidden in Zoe's closet. Blue fibers from Zoe's hoodie were confirmed to match those found on her mother's nightgown. And most damning of all, Eleanor's autopsy revealed skin cells under her fingernails that matched Zoe's DNA. Richard Wells, devastated by the dual tragedy of losing his wife and learning his daughter was responsible, retreated from public life. Bailey, the golden retriever who had unwittingly played a role in the aftermath of the crime, was taken in by Catherine Walsh. 3 months later, as Sarah was finishing the paperwork to close the case, she received a letter. It was from Zoe, written from the juvenile detention center where she was awaiting trial. Detective Morgan? It read, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did and why I did it. I convinced myself that Mom was the villain in my story, that she was trying to steal my future. But the truth is, she just wanted what she thought was best for me. She loved me in her way. I see that now. I wish I could blame someone else. The dog, an intruder, anyone. But my prints were on the pillow, just like my choices were my own. No one else to blame, not even Bailey. Sarah set the letter aside, thinking about the Wells family and how a conflict that seemed so ordinary, a parent and child disagreeing about the future, had spiraled into tragedy. In her 15 years as a detective, she had learned that the most dangerous emotions often lurked beneath the most ordinary surfaces, and that sometimes the call was coming from inside the house. In Oakwood Heights, the neighborhood had returned to its peaceful routine. The crime tape was long gone. The Wells house sold to a new family, but the residents now locked their doors at night, checked on their neighbors more frequently, and regarded the perfect facades of their community with a slightly more skeptical eye. And in Catherine Walsh's backyard, Bailey the golden retriever lay in the sun, his faithful eyes occasionally turning toward the road, as if still waiting for someone who would never come home. The case of Eleanor Wells would be remembered in the department for years to come, a reminder that sometimes the most telling evidence isn't what's found at the scene, but what should be there and isn't, and that in the end, no matter how cleverly a crime is planned, the truth has a way of leaving its fingerprints behind. In the stillness of her office, with the Wells case file finally closed, Detective Sarah Morgan thought about prints on pillows, dogs that didn't bark, and daughters who couldn't escape their own choices. Sometimes, she reflected, the most perfect-seeming families harbored the deepest secrets, and sometimes the most valuable clue was the one that had been there all along, hiding in plain sight, like a fingerprint on a pillow that shouldn't have been there at all.